If you think cutting someone off a phone plan is petty, wait until you hear what happened when my sister tried to save $30 a month. By the time I was done with her, that $30 cost her over $15,000. And the best part? Every single penny was legally owed. This is the story of how 20 years of borrowing came back to bite her in the most spectacular way possible. Before we continue, please subscribe to the channel, like, and let me know where you're listening from in the comments. I never thought a simple text message about a phone plan would lead me to destroy my sister's financial life, but here we are. And the best part? Every single penny was legally owed. My name is Maya and I'm a 34-year-old CPA. I've always been the responsible one, the quiet one, the one who keeps her head down and works hard. Growing up, I was the kid who did her homework without being asked, saved her allowance, and never caused trouble. My sister Jessica, 3 years younger, was the complete opposite. She was loud, dramatic, charismatic, and somehow, she was always everyone's favorite. This story really begins 20 years ago when I got my first job at 16, working at a local grocery store after school. I was so proud of that paycheck, even though it was barely minimum wage. I remember showing my parents my first stub, and they smiled politely before turning their attention back to Jessica's latest drama with her high school boyfriend. That should have been my first red flag, but I was just a kid who wanted to make everyone happy. The borrowing started small. Jessica was only 13, but she had expensive taste even then. "Maya, can you spot me $20 for that new lip gloss everyone has? I'll pay you back when I get my birthday money." Of course, I said yes. She was my baby sister and $20 felt like nothing when I was making my own money for the first time. The birthday money never materialized into repayment, but I didn't think much of it. Then it was $30 for a movie night with friends, $50 for a new pair of jeans, $100 for homecoming expenses. Each time, Jessica promised to pay me back next week or when I get money from grandma or after I babysit the neighbor's kids. The excuses were creative, but the repayment never came. By the time Jessica turned 18, the amounts had grown significantly. She needed $300 for car insurance, $500 for community college textbooks, $800 for a security deposit on her first apartment. And every single time, when I hesitated or asked about previous loans, our parents would intervene. "Maya, she's your sister," my mom would say with that disappointed tone that made my stomach clench. "Family helps family. You make good money now with your accounting job. Jessica is just getting started in life. Don't be so calculating about everything," my dad would add, somehow making my responsible financial planning sound like a character flaw. "She'll pay you back when she can. Money isn't everything." But here's the thing about being an accountant, I am calculating. It's literally my job, and by year 3 of Jessica's borrowing, I started keeping records. Not because I planned to use them, but because my therapist suggested it might help me process my feelings about the family dynamic. I created a simple Excel spreadsheet called Jessica's Loans, Complete Record. Date, amount, stated purpose, method of transfer, any witnesses present. What started as a therapeutic exercise became a comprehensive financial history. Screenshots of text conversations where Jessica begged for money, bank transfer receipts, even voice recordings of phone calls where she promised repayment, which I later learned were perfectly legal in my state. The pattern was always the same. Jessica would create some urgent financial crisis, a broken-down car, an unexpected bill, a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity that required immediate cash. She'd call me crying or show up at my apartment looking devastated. She'd promise this was the last time, that she just needed this one favor to get back on her feet. And like an idiot, I'd transfer the money, add it to my spreadsheet, and tell myself that family was more important than money. Meanwhile, Jessica was living it up. Designer purses while claiming she couldn't afford groceries. Weekend getaways to the beach while owing me 3 months of promised car payments. Expensive dinners at trendy restaurants posted all over her Instagram. The same week she'd called me sobbing about not being able to pay rent. The worst part wasn't just the money, though. It was watching her get credit for my generosity. At family dinners, Jessica would casually mention her latest purchase or trip, and our parents would praise her for doing so well and really getting her life together. Meanwhile, my actual achievements, earning my CPA license, getting promoted, buying my own house, were met with polite nods before the conversation inevitably shifted back to Jessica's latest adventure, funded by yours truly. 5 years ago, during Jessica's dramatic divorce from her first husband, she called me in tears. She needed to be added to my phone plan because her ex had kicked her off his family plan, and she couldn't afford the deposit for her own service. Just temporarily, she promised. Until I get back on my feet financially. Of course, I said yes. I always said yes. Jessica joined my plan, promised to Venmo me her portion every month, and naturally, never did. I absorbed the costs without complaint, adding each month's charges to my ever-growing spreadsheet. She even convinced me to upgrade her phone twice over the years, promising to pay me back for the device costs. Those promises, like all the others, evaporated into thin air. But the most infuriating part was how she spun it to everyone else. Jessica told our parents, our relatives, even mutual friends, that she was generously letting me use her family plan. She positioned herself as the responsible one, taking care of her older sister's phone needs. I never corrected her because I thought keeping the peace was more important than setting the record straight. That was my mistake. In trying to be the bigger person, I'd become the invisible person. The family ATM who funded everyone's perception of Jessica as generous and successful. 20 years, 247 documented transactions, and I still told myself this was normal. This was family. This was love. Until the text message that changed everything. That text message arrived on a Tuesday morning while I was having my coffee before work. I nearly choked when I read it. "Hey Maya, I'm taking you off my phone plan to save money. Need you to find your own plan by Friday. Thanks." I stared at my phone screen, reading it 3 times to make sure I wasn't hallucinating. My phone plan. The one I'd been paying for entirely by myself for 5 years. The plan that Jessica had never contributed a single dollar to, despite promising monthly payments that never materialized. She was taking me off a plan that I owned, that was in my name, that came out of my bank account every month. But that wasn't even the most infuriating part. Jessica had been telling everyone, our parents, relatives, friends, that she was graciously letting me use her family plan. She'd positioned herself as the generous sister taking care of poor Maya's phone needs. And now she was kicking me off her plan to save money. My hands were shaking as I called our parents. Surely, this time, they'd see how ridiculous Jessica was being. This time, they'd have to acknowledge that something was seriously wrong with this picture. "Mom, did you know that Jessica thinks the phone plan is hers?" I asked, trying to keep my voice steady. "Well, honey, she did say she was helping you out with phone service," my mom replied, sounding distracted. "Maybe she just needs to cut back on expenses. You know how hard things have been for her since the divorce." "The divorce that was 3 years ago, Mom. And it's not her phone plan, it's mine. I've been paying for it this entire time." "Maya, don't be dramatic. It's just a phone plan. Can't you just be supportive of Jessica trying to be more financially responsible? She's really growing as a person." I hung up and immediately called my dad, thinking maybe he'd be more reasonable. He wasn't. "Your sister is finally learning to budget and be independent," he said, pride evident in his voice. "Why can't you just be happy for her growth instead of making this about money? You make plenty at your accounting job." By Thursday evening, I was sitting alone in my apartment, staring at my laptop screen. Open in front of me was the Excel file I'd been maintaining for 15 years. Jessica's loans, complete record. 247 individual transactions. Car payments she'd promised to split but never did. Emergency loans that funded vacations. Rent deposits that became shopping sprees. The numbers stared back at me. $23,847.32 in principal. But I wasn't just any lender, I was a CPA who understood how money actually worked. I opened a new spreadsheet and started calculating interest. Prime rate plus 3%, compounded monthly from the date of each loan. Then late fees, because what reasonable lending institution wouldn't charge late fees after 20 years of non-payment? The total was staggering $31,429.18. I sat back in my chair, feeling something shift inside me. For 20 years, I'd told myself that keeping the peace was worth more than the money. That being the good sister meant absorbing Jessica's financial irresponsibility. That family meant never keeping score. But Jessica had just scored a point, and it wasn't even with her own ball. I spent the weekend creating something beautiful. A professional invoice, complete with my CPA letterhead. Statement of outstanding debt, account Jessica Chen. Every loan meticulously documented. Interest calculations that would make any accountant proud. Payment terms that were more than fair considering the circumstances. The most painful part was reviewing the supporting documentation. Screenshots of Jessica's Instagram posts showing expensive dinners from the same week she'd called me crying about not being able to afford groceries. Photos of designer bags purchased the day after I'd transferred money for her emergency car repairs. Beach vacation posts with captions about treating herself while owing me thousands in unpaid loans. But the screenshot that broke me was from just last month. Jessica had posted on Instagram about her new financial independence journey and how she was cutting unnecessary expenses to become more responsible. The post had 37 likes from family members and friends, all praising her newfound financial maturity. Several comments specifically mentioned how proud they were of her finally growing up and taking control of her finances. She was using me as her example of an unnecessary expense. The sister who had funded her lifestyle for 2 decades was now being positioned as dead weight she was responsibly cutting loose. That's when I realized this had never been about money at all. This was about power, control, and Jessica's desperate need to be seen as successful and generous while actually being neither. She'd built her entire public persona on my financial support, and then had the audacity to publicly frame removing that support as her own responsible decision-making. I looked at the invoice one more time. $31,429.18. The cost of 20 years of family helping family. The phone plan Jessica was so proudly cutting me off from. $30 a month. In her quest to save $30 monthly, she was about to discover that her free money had actually been a very expensive loan. I scheduled the email to send on Monday morning. Professional, courteous, and absolutely devastating. Because Jessica was right about one thing, it was time for both of us to become more financially responsible. Starting with her paying back every penny she owed me. As I prepared for bed that night, I felt something I hadn't experienced in 20 years when it came to my family excitement. Tomorrow, Jessica was going to learn the difference between generosity and stupidity, and I was finally going to find out what it felt like to stop being the family ATM. The invoice was ready, the documentation was airtight, and my patience had officially run out. Monday morning at 9 a.m. sharp, I hit send. The invoice went out via certified mail, email, and text message simultaneously. Professional, thorough, and absolutely nuclear. Within 10 minutes, my phone started buzzing. Jessica's number flashed on the screen repeatedly. I let every single call go to voicemail. Her text messages started pouring in. What the hell is this? You can't be serious. This is insane. I'm your sister. I responded exactly once. Payment plans available upon request. Please remit payment by due date to maintain family credit rating. The explosion was immediate. My parents called within the hour, their voices shaking with rage. Maya, what have you done? This is vindictive and cruel, my mother shrieked. Jessica is crying hysterically. How could you be so calculating? I'm simply requesting repayment of documented loans, I replied calmly. Jessica borrowed this money willingly. I have records of every transaction. But $30,000? That's impossible, my father sputtered. Actually, it's $31,429.18. Would you like to review the supporting documentation? The silence was deafening. By Wednesday, Jessica had recruited flying monkeys from across our extended family tree. Aunts, uncles, and cousins I barely spoke to were suddenly calling to tell me I was being unreasonable. Jessica had spun herself as the victim of her money-obsessed sister who was trying to destroy her financially over petty amounts. But something unexpected happened. When I provided summary spreadsheets to family members who demanded proof, some of them went quiet, really quiet. Then, one by one, they started reaching out privately. Maya, I had no idea the borrowing was this extensive, my aunt whispered during a hushed phone call. Jessica owes me $4,000 too, but I never documented it like you did. Your sister borrowed $800 from me last Christmas, my cousin admitted. Said it was for emergency car repairs, but then I saw her Instagram posts from that spa weekend. The family investigation had backfired spectacularly on Jessica. Instead of rallying troops against me, she'd accidentally exposed a 20-year pattern of financial manipulation that extended far beyond just me. Jessica tried everything. She offered to pay something reasonable like $5,000 to call it even. When I declined, she attempted to negotiate through our parents. Maya's being completely unreasonable, she sobbed to anyone who would listen. She's destroying our family over money. But her greatest mistake was underestimating how thorough my documentation was. When she claimed she'd only borrowed maybe 8 or 9,000 over the years, I released a summary showing the top 20 largest loans, each with screenshots of her begging texts and promises to repay. When she said the interest calculations were made up, I provided the mathematical formulas and referenced standard lending practices. Jessica's friends started distancing themselves when they realized their own emergency loans to her were part of a larger pattern. Her coworkers began asking uncomfortable questions about money she'd borrowed from them. The image she'd carefully crafted as generous and successful crumbled under the weight of documented evidence. 2 weeks after the invoice went out, Jessica showed up at my apartment unannounced, mascara running down her face. "Please, Maya. I'll lose my apartment if I have to pay this. Can't we work something out?" I offered payment plan options in the original invoice. I replied through my closed door. "Have you reviewed them? But the interest and late fees are so high, lower than most credit cards, actually, and significantly more generous than what you'd get from any legitimate lending institution after defaulting for 20 years. The breaking point came when Jessica discovered that our parents had quietly asked me for a loan the month before, for her benefit, of course. They needed money to help Jessica with her car payment, not knowing she'd just bought a $700 purse the same week. When they realized I'd been the family's secret financial backbone for years, not the burden Jessica had painted me as, their tune changed dramatically. Faced with potential legal action, damaged relationships across the extended family, and the very real possibility of credit reporting, Jessica finally capitulated. She agreed to a formal payment plan, $2,000 down, then $500 monthly for 5 years, with a legal contract my attorney drafted. The down payment came from her vacation fund, ironically, money she'd been saving for another beach trip while claiming poverty to everyone else. 6 months later, Jessica defaulted, missing payments, avoiding my calls, back to her old tricks. So I did exactly what I'd promised in our contract. I reported the debt to credit agencies. Jessica's credit score tanked right as she was trying to buy a house with her new boyfriend. She called me screaming about ruining her future, but I was past caring about her tantrums. "I'll remove the credit reporting for immediate payment of the remaining balance," I offered calmly. 3 days later, Jessica had to go to our parents, hat in hand, asking them to loan her the money to pay me off. They finally saw the pattern they'd enabled for decades. They paid me, but Jessica had to sign a formal loan agreement with them too, complete with payment schedules and consequences. I used that money for a month-long trip to Europe, something I'd dreamed of but never done because there was always some Jessica crisis requiring my funds. I posted photos with the caption, "Finally spending my own money on myself." The best part? Every family member who needs to borrow money now comes to me with written agreements and realistic payment plans. Amazing how that works when you stop accepting "trust me" as collateral. Jessica learned an expensive lesson. $30 saved on a phone plan cost her over $30,000 in reality. And I learned something even more valuable: sometimes the most loving thing you can do for someone is stop enabling their worst behavior. Thank you for listening. Don't forget to subscribe, like, and feel free to share your story or opinions in the comments.